The following is a special video presentation of the Hennepin County Library.
Hi, welcome to A Discussion With. My name is Bruce Southworth. I'm a mystery book reviewer for Once Upon a Crime Mystery Books in the Twin Cities, as well as for Publishers Weekly magazine. My guests today are Jerome Doolittle and Sarah Shankman. Sarah has her sixth Samantha Adams book out, just published by Pocket Books, called He Was Her Man. Sarah has worked in the publishing field. She's taught English, and I understand she gave up pursuing a PhD in English to go into storytelling and pursue the sound of the English language. Her first book was published in 1980 called Impersonal Attractions. It was a thriller. And I'd like to also find out a little bit later about the fact that the first four Samantha Adams stories were written under a pseudonym, Alice Story. She's a member of the executive board of the International Association of Crime Writers and Sisters in Crime, among other organizations. And Jerome Doolittle, excuse me, his fourth Tom Bethany book, Headlock, is just out from Pocket Books. In his career, he's been a journalist. He's worked for the United States Information Agency in Casablanca in the middle 1960s and in Laos in the late 1960s. I understand also he was a restaurateur during part of that time. And then when he got back to the United States, he wrote speeches for President Carter and became the chief public affairs officer for the Federal Aviation Agency. He's taught writing, at Harvard. And besides the Tom Bethany series, he's written a couple of books on the wilderness for Time Life. Welcome to you both.
Thank you.
Thank you
Good
for
to
being
be
here. Let's start out just by talking about since this is a mystery tour, you're part of the Pocket Books Pro-Am Gumshoe Tour in the fall of 1993 here. Can you tell me a little bit each about the characters that you write? Samantha Adams and Tom Bethany. Sarah, how about if we start with you? What's she like?
Sam Adams is an amateur sleuth. She was for a while a reporter for the San Francisco Chronicle and then for the Atlanta Journal-Constitution. But when I designed her, I was smart enough to give her a trust fund, which I think all journalists should have. So she's left the newspaper business and is now working on a book called American Weird, which allows her to travel around the South, which is where I grew up and my favorite part of the country, investigating various strange goings-on. She's a feminist with a sense of humor. She has my smart mouth and my sensibility. She's about 41 or so, and is a recovering alcoholic.
Okay. And how about Tom Bethany?
Well, Tom was a guy who was a schoolboy wrestler and football player and athlete from a very poor community in upstate New York, and went on to become a college wrestler and eventually made the Olympic team in 1980, but there was no Olympic team in 1980, as you remember, because President Carter was sending a little message to Leonid Brezhnev. So in a fit of pique, he went to work for Teddy Kennedy as an advance man and sort of a bodyguard in the Iowa primaries, and then Kennedy lost, and then he jumped over to Carter. So he began as sort of a political op, and after Carter's defeat in that election, he went back with some of the other people in the campaign to Cambridge and became sort of a hanger-on around Harvard, and attended classes, snuck in, and did everything but matriculate and graduate. So he stole an education there and hangs around the fringes, doing various jobs, mostly in the political security field. And he is basically a tough guy for the L word, for the liberal side of American life.
The infamous L word, that we've heard in previous campaigns. Given both of your backgrounds and both of your characters, the characters, are they composites of facets of your life? Are they people that you've known? How much of them is you, or how much of you is them, I guess would be?
Well, not much. There's sort of wish fulfillment. I mean, I wish I were like him, I suppose, in some respects. But the difficulty with these sorts of things is the demands of the genre sort of is that you've got to have a tough guy who's breaking heads. That's what you're writing. You're writing sort of hard-boiled or semi-hard-boiled, whatever I do. And people like that in real life tend to be sort of sickos and weird and bullies and unattractive people. So how do you set up a personality that can plausibly do these things and yet is not so repellent that you don't want to spend any time with him? And I tried to set this guy up as a guy who'd been abused and beaten by his father, came from a very tough and very poor rural poverty background, and responded not as a lot of people do, by passing it down the line to his own kids or his own relatives and friends and so forth, but by finding bigger bullies to beat up on. So they're kind of revenge fantasies, like Death Wish, except with more of a political slant to them. Mm-hmm. He picks on great big enemies instead of single murderers usually, people who stand for large institutions.
Yeah, such as in your first book, the fellow who is potentially going to be picked for the Secretary of State, I believe it was.
Yeah.
It says taking on big targets.
Yeah.
How about you? Is Samantha a kind of an amalgam of a lot of your traits, or a lot of people that you know?
She is. I think she's an amalgam of many of my traits. There are some ways in which we're dissimilar, but as I said, she does have my view of the world, my sensibility, sense of humor, and a fascination with Southern society and pop culture and how that reflects American culture.
Which is probably why she's writing this book, The American Weird.
That's right.
Now, do you collect some of these kinds of things? The fellow who writes the News of the Weird column has on an interview, he was saying that a lot of people have now been sending him just lots of very strange stuff in the mail. Yeah. And do you get that kind of thing as a result of her advocation?
I don't receive things from fans, but I do indeed clip constantly and have huge files of things which are completely disorganized on strange goings on in America. Just this morning on the plane, Jerry and I were reading about two guys who got into a fight in a hot tub, and one of them bit the tip of the other one's nose off, and they reattached his nose, but it didn't take, so they had to take some flesh from his chin and attach it to his nose, and it was noted by the writer that now he was going to have to shave his nose, and that's the sort of thing that I delight in. You know, I can take that and build a whole character, a whole theme out of that. Yes.
Yes.
And yet, you know, you can't really go beyond the newspapers. Whenever you think you've thought of something totally outrageous, something like Wayne Bobbitt comes up, you know, and you've been beaten again by reality. You know, you can't make up Lenora Bobbitt and Wayne and.
It's interesting because I know that another fairly very popular writer these days, Carl Hyacin. Right. I mean, his books are populated with very, very strange people doing very strange things. People with arms that are have weed whackers attached to them and all that sort of thing. And I just wonder if it's a trend in American mystery writing fiction that people are taking.
I think it's a trend in America.
That America's getting weirder and weirder.
Well, Carl, a brother of mine is an editor, a newspaper editor down in Florida, and he tells me that virtually everything he's ever read in Carl Hyacin's books is factual. I mean, the weed whacker obviously isn't, because that's anatomically impossible, but in his first book, where you have a real estate developer blowing up an entire island with dynamite so that he won't have to cut down the trees before he ruins it with developments, I mean, that happened. And, you know, virtually everything, the whole business with the plastic surgeons and whatnot, all that is reportage. It's not fiction. This guy's a Floridian, and he hates what's happened to his state, and he picks pieces out of the paper and puts them in his books. And I do a lot of that too. And as Sarah does. I mean, I'm always collecting stuff and throwing it in. You know, I save things for a year or two like a squirrel and then throw it all into the book.
And you know, things just fall in your lap. I mean, I was thinking about doing an Elvis book, which I did eventually, which is the 5th in the series, called The King is Dead, and I was home in Louisiana visiting prior to taking a trip through the Mississippi Delta looking for Elvisiana, and I had dinner with a cousin I hadn't seen in many years, and he took me over to visit with some other people, and I noticed when we drove up that the yard and the driveway were just littered with motorcycles. And we went in, and I discovered that I had fallen into a dinner party that was a fish fry, actually, that was being held by the Christian Motorcycle Association. Now, I could not have made these people up, but I was delighted that they came my way. I turned them into the Bikers for Jesus, who play a major role in The King is Dead.
I wouldn't have believed that either if it hadn't been for the fact that one of the people where I work was basically a biker chick. You know, she was a little tiny thing, and she had a Harley, and they would go out to Sturgis, South Dakota for the big rallies, and they would proselytize. So, you know, these things do occur, as you say. They're real things.
There is a real organization, Bikers for Jesus.
There's a real Christian motorcycle
you're right.
association. Yeah, about 65,000
Right.
strong. Yeah, and they have rallies and meets, and mostly they drive their hogs up to things like Burger Kings and give out tracts to proselytize children. And they say things like, you know, if Jesus would be a biker if he were here today.
Well, I think that's probably right.
It would certainly be a convenient way to get around and to impose your philosophy in a way. I mean, you're not going to turn down a tract from some guy who gets off one of these things and hands it to you. That is for sure. I'd like to find out a little bit about Alice Story. You're a pseudonym of a few books anyway, and I guess it's was that because you chose the pseudonym because you had written a couple of other books and you wanted to separate the two? And
it's actually sort of a boring publishing story. I had written two earlier books, and basically came down to the fact that I was writing a literary novel, and my literary publisher didn't want my literary career besmirched with the taint of mystery, so I was asked to please take a pseudonym, which was my mother's maiden name.
Oh, okay. Well, I thought Story had something to do with story. And
Nope, real name.
Real name. That's interesting.
One of the getting back a little bit to the stuff out of newspapers is the book I have that just came out, Headlock, deals with a televangelist who is running for the Senate in the state of Virginia. Well, we now in real life have Ollie North running for the Senate in the state of Virginia. Well, weird enough as it is. We also have Jerry Falwell, who's from the state of Virginia and has a big church down in Lynchburg. But what drove me to this was a very real thing, which was the Anita Hill, Clarence Thomas hearings, which I watched, like a serpent transfixing a little bird. I watched from A to Z until the whole thing was done at 2 in the morning, and later went down to Washington and read the transcripts word for word and took notes and just took huge chunks of the dialogue directly into this book, the Headlock, which deals with violence outside abortion clinics, which I might add I'd written before violence, before the murders began outside abortion clinics. But there's no way that you can create more bizarre characters than the cast of characters in a Senate Judiciary Committee and the parade of witnesses at that hearing. I mean, it's just magnificent drama. All you can do is, it's just, all we can write is pale imitations of the true weirdness that's out there.
The truth is stranger than fiction. It's that adage. That's
Indeed.
The cast of characters that you're referring to, thinking in both of your books, but certainly in yours to a large extent, there are lots and lots of people. I mean, they're well-populated books, and you don't really seem to create flat characters. I mean, none of them are particularly flat. I mean, sure, it has to do with the weird aspect.
Right.
But how do you keep track of all of these people and in the course of where they're supposed to be in the book at any one time, just from a logistics point of view? How do you structure your books when you've got all these people that you're trying to...
Well, I keep long lists of them. I mean, it is difficult for me to keep them straight sometime. The way I structure books is just absolutely willy-nilly. I mean, I'm not a writer who's ever been able to outline. I have a notion, and I just head out in that direction and hope that the book and I end up in the same place at the same time. It's not the most efficient way to create fiction, but it does keep you paying attention.
Yeah, it's kind of a discovery process for you too, then.
Yes.
Do you find your characters, when you do it that way, sort of surprise you and go in different
absolutely.
directions?
Do you know? I mean, and characters drive up in books that I never intended to be in the books, and then they develop lives of their own and sort of take over the story.
And then
I get to sit back and see where they're going.
Okay. Now you teach writing at Harvard, or taught?
I did, yeah. No, I've left there about 3 or 4 years ago.
Now, either from your point of view or from the proper way to do it, I don't know if you teach your way or not. How do you structure your books? How do you approach putting something together? Because they seem very, I won't say methodical. I mean, but there's kind of a definite motion through them.
Yeah, well, I taught nonfiction actually at Harvard, but I think I tell people the same thing for both, and I kids would get in trouble constantly in writing nonfiction, writing essays or pieces, reports, that kind of thing, in jumping back and forth in time, having flashbacks and not proceeding linearly in a linear fashion from A to B to C to D, and on a timeline. And that can be handled if you're a very good writer, but if you're not a terribly skilled writer, it's tough to, and it's much easier to progress in the natural order of events. And since I have trouble reading books that zigzag back and forth and juggle a lot of characters and have complicated resolutions and clues all over the place, and I'm never able to solve them, so obviously I can't write them either. And mine progress in kind of a dumb, literal progression from the beginning to the end with no flashbacks and very few diversions. And some of that is imposed by the fact that the hero is in the first person, and that limits you a lot, because you can't go into other places. Your guy has to have seen whatever happened, or has to have heard whatever happened. So as you see, you can't move behind the scenes or go downtown or go across town or go backwards or forwards very much. You're kind of limited to a simple plotting or running, if you're lucky, progression from the beginning to the end.
Okay. Except in your case, for example, Samantha overhears things. It would have to be the same kind of thing. It would be direct empirical evidence, basically, that you would hear.
Except that mine are in the third person, so that I can move all over the place.
Right. Yeah.
She can hop inside somebody else's head and say, somebody else. She can ascribe thoughts to other characters, and I can't.
Yeah. And you do that with dialogue sometimes too.
Yes.
It's kind of interesting. Speaking of dialogue, kind of change of pace here. There's a story rather a long story about coon dogs in your book, and I'm curious. Now you said at the beginning that you came from sort of the no dancing, no fun part of Louisiana.
That's right, the northern part of the state.
Okay. Was there a storytelling aspect to your growing up, though, to kind of draw from that, or?
Yes, I certainly remember going to my grandmother's house and sitting around listening to my mother's relatives tell stories. I remember seeing one of my favorite photographs, as a matter of fact, is of several uncles sitting down, hunkered down, squatting in the yard, telling stories in the afternoon after dinner. And each of these books has like the coon dog story, a story within the story that really has relatively little to do with the rest of the book. And it's what I refer to as a when the pigs ate Willie sort of school of Southern storytelling, which is to just let it fly, just to tell the most outrageous story possible. And that's one of the fun aspects of the book for me.
Yeah, well, it's interesting because in that particular instance, one of the characters, the object is to go off and investigate, the location of someone who'd been killed and so on. We don't give too much away. And one character is saying, "Now, what are you guys talking about? Let's get on with this." And it's interesting. Again, your approach allows you to do that versus the sort of the more linear approach in the books.
Well, you also have the New England is not exactly an oral and storytelling culture. It's sort of the opposite. It's a clotted and repressed culture in many ways. And my protagonist, or hero, is a guy who's what down south you might call a TWT, toothless white trash, and up north you call him a woodchuck. A guy from a rural, very poor background, and a certain amount of social resentment, and not a verbal culture particularly, unless you happen to be a reader and have read a lot of stories in your youth, as opposed to hearing a lot of stories. And my characters, by virtue of their upbringing, the protagonist and his lady friend are both, she from a high class and he from a low class, white and northern background, are not terribly verbal people, and they tend to be a little bit repressed, and that's just who they are.
I was curious about his insistence on privacy. To the extent of having his apartment rented in a different name, the phone unlisted, but even under a different name at that, and so on. What's the origin for that?
I don't know, but it certainly is a strong thing in American culture. The whole idea is in Huck Finn, the light out for the territories, changing your identity, showing up in a new town, starting over, and the ultimate in that is to strip off your whole identity, as Tom Bethany has done in these books, at a certain point in his life, he wanted to drop out of the whole database in America. So he checked in, he paid off and cashed in all his credit cards, got rid of them, tore them up, changed his name, and gets his mail under a different address and lives in an apartment under another name, and has a phone that's unlisted under a different name than his own. And there is, I can't explain what it is. It's something in the drifting kind of rootless cowboy ethic or something in America, but it's something that is very powerful with people. There are books on how to change your identity and how to disappear. There's even a publishing house called Loom Panics out in Washington that publishes a lot of this stuff, and there's a whole underworld of drifting. When you think of a huge population of people in trailers, for example, elderly people and people who just have a little bit of dough or maybe work seasonally part-time or something, and most of the time nobody knows where they are in this country. This is almost the only country in the world where people can really disappear and drift around and never be seen and not have a place where they get mail and not have ID numbers, and it's something very basic to American character, I think. I'm not saying it's good or bad, but it's there.
Whereas the part of the country where I come from, when you're introduced, people say, "Now, honey, who was your mama? And who was her mama?" And that's how you're placed in the world.
You establish those roots.
Establish those roots. Who were your people?
Yeah. There was a comment again in your most recent book where somebody said, "Not that I'd ever heard of him." And you said that was sort of that kind of a comment would be a kiss of death, and that gets back to that. We don't know who you are. We don't know what your roots are.
That's right.
You basically don't exist to us
That's
then
right.
at that point.
It's very much a way of placing you. How long have you been here? Yeah.
But in the West, for example, in West Texas, I used to work in the oil fields in West Texas when I was a kid, and people down there, they would never ask you your name. There's a point of politeness not to ask you your name. There are a few names that fit everybody. Blackie, Whitey, Shorty, Heavy, Red, Slim. Between them, you had every human being, sort of. And I remember a guy asked me one time, a guy I was working with said, "What's your name, Slim?" And the other guys just jumped on and said, "What do you mean what that boy's name is? He won't tell you his name, he's going to tell you. No, there's none of your damn business what his name is." And, sort of the French Foreign Legion idea. They could ask politely what state you came from, but beyond that, it was impolite to ask.
That's interesting. That's very interesting. It kind of reminiscent of the another area of interest I have is the Sherlockian world, that whole genre of Victorian fiction where everybody refers to each other, and I'm sure they still do in England, mostly just by the last name. And if you have to know somebody very well for a very long time before you get permission to talk to them, or address them rather, by their first name. You mentioned something about a cowboy ethic. Is Tom Bethany an example of Jerry Healy made a reference at one point about the private detective is really a vigilante, and he's out there and he's kind of got a foot in both worlds, the legal world and the outside or extra legal world. Is Tom Bethany kind of in that same mold?
Yeah, and I think virtually all of that type of fiction is in this country. That's what underlies it. If your hero is a cop, he's sort of a Dirty Harry type of cop. He doesn't fit in the police force, and he's unhappy with the authority and the lines of authority, and so he sets out to be essentially his own law and order, law west of the Pecos, and that, of course, is exactly what all of the Dashiell Hammett, the Sam Spades, people like this have always been. They're there correcting wrongs or evils or something that the police either can't or won't correct. They're also, what was his name, Bernard Goetz, the subway shooter in New York. And in that sense, it's a sort of an anarchic and medieval, almost political view of the world. And
that brings up another question, and this is good for both of you actually, because I don't remember who it was who suggested, may have been more than one writer who suggested that the purpose of a mystery is to make the reader feel good about themselves when they finally finished it, in the sense of, I think, this is, the bad guys finally got it, and, attaboy, go after him, and you just think, boy, justice has been served. Is that, do you both kind of feel that way? Is mystery escapist in that sense, if that's actually escapist a sense?
Well, I think it does. I think that the classic mystery story or crime story that that the world always has been set right in some way. It might not be in a major way, but at least in some minor way, that there has been a satisfactory conclusion to a series of events, whereas in real life, that's so rarely true. You know, there's not this neat, tidy ending where the bad guys necessarily get what they deserve and goodness is rewarded. So that's a pleasurable experience, along with the rest of the ride of whatever the story might be.
Well, you know, whether you have a happy ending or an unhappy ending to life or to a story depends on where you choose to end it. I mean, you can end with the wedding, and that's a happy ending. Now you can go beyond the wedding into the dissolution of the marriage and divorce and so forth, and the eventual suicide of both parties. And so that's an unhappy ending, right? Now, if you write serious fiction in America, you generally tend to be, or often tend to be, kind of a depressive person, and at the end of it, something awful has happened to you, the hero. Assuming you know there's an element of you probably in the hero. Ernest Hemingway, every book he wrote wound up with a hero about to be killed or just ruined by a woman, or something awful has just happened to him. And that indeed is what Hemingway was searching for all his life. He wanted to blow his brains out the way his father had, and he eventually did. So all his books, from his point of view, had happy endings. If you're not a depressive, or if you have a little more upbeat view of life, you chop it off a little earlier, and I think mysteries do that. They chop it off before things have fallen to hell. But I mean, everybody's life is full of happy endings. If you stop it at a certain point, and there are disasters too. It's just a question of which one you pick.
Yeah, I imagine that given that in essence the mystery is a sort of a puzzle where a lot of elements are loose ends to start with, and they all intertwine, and they finally come to a conclusion. It's almost cheating the reader to leave all these things hanging out. I know it annoys me sometimes when I'm reading books, and I find...
But sometimes they want to know everything. I had a fan the other day ask me about the conclusion of this current book, He Was Her Man, and I thought that I had fairly clearly indicated. I had left that a good guy was about a good bad guy. That is, he had done some bad things but was more good than bad, was about to get away. Well, she wanted to know, where was he? I mean, where is he today?
Read the sequel. Gotta read the sequel. That's what that's set up for. That's an old publishing trick too, right? Yeah.
Yes,
Stay
indeed.
tuned.
It's well, I'm just, you know, Sarah's seen a lot more of this than I have, because she's written more of these books than I have. But it's amazing and kind of gratifying to find the extent to which people know your characters often better than you. They'll mention characters. Whatever happened to so and so? You can't remember who the character was, but you know, you create a little kind of a world that people do jump inside of and seem to enjoy themselves and remember and maybe more emotionally engaged in a way than you are.
Yeah, I was pleased to see too. I mean, I'm just as guilty of that as anyone else with Wanda. You know, Vollmer coming back and through. So I think that's.
Yeah, we may see more of Wanda. I like her.
Yeah, she's a very spunky lady. That's really neat. Well, we are actually just about at time. I don't know where the time did go, but I want to thank both of you, Sarah Shankman, Jerome Doolittle, for being with us today. I appreciate your coming very much.
Well,
thank you.
Thank you, Bruce.
You're right.
A presentation of the Hennepin County Library.